What's going on, people? It's your boy Tone, back with another video. Today we got Thomas Sowell once again. Facts about slavery never mentioned in schools. This is probably gonna be a good one. Alright, I'm gonna try my best not to be, you know what I'm saying? Not to be triggered out this motherfucker. But we here. So, first time watching, make sure you guys click like, subscribe to this content. Shout out to all my subs, and shout out to everybody showing love. So, without further ado, let's get into it, y'all. Come on. This is going to be interesting, man. We'll see what happens.
The instrumental use of the history of slavery today also underlies the claim that slavery grew out of racism. For most of its long history, which includes most of the history of the human race, slavery was largely not the enslavement of racially different people, for the simple reason that only in recent centuries has either the technology or the wealth existed to go to another continent to get slaves and transport them en masse across an ocean. People were enslaved because they were vulnerable, not because of how they looked. The peoples of the Balkans were enslaved by fellow Europeans, as well as by the peoples of the Middle East, for at least 6 centuries before the first African was brought to the Western Hemisphere. Before the modern era, by and large, Europeans enslaved other Europeans, Asians enslaved other Asians, Africans enslaved other Africans, and the indigenous peoples of the Western Hemisphere enslaved other indigenous peoples of the Western Hemisphere. Slavery was not based on race, much less on theories about race. Only relatively late in history did enslavement across racial lines occur on such a scale as to promote an ideology of racism that outlasted the institution of slavery itself.
Hold on. All right, so basically what I'm getting from this so far is that slavery wasn't based on race, was not based on the color of your skin, but based on you being vulnerable, I guess, easily taken advantage of. That's what I'm getting so far. So nothing too crazy. I already knew that blacks did enslave other blacks and so on and so forth with other races. But this is kind of interesting though. It's kind of crazy. Let's keep going.
A separate people were enslaved. They were disdained or despised, whether they were different by country, religion, caste, race, or tribe. In East Africa, the Maasai were feared slave raiders, and other African tribes, either alone or in conjunction with Arabs, enslaved their more vulnerable neighbors. As late as 1891, it was reported that Manyuema slavers had demoralized surrounding tribes, destroying crops, and famine reigned everywhere. Even in the early 20th century.
And that's also crazy, y'all. It be your own people. It be your own people, man. In exchange for goods, in exchange for quick cash, gold, or whatever they thought was valuable at that time, you know, they'll go over to the next tribe, shackle you up, and say to the foreigners, it's crazy. So let's keep it going. Let's get it.
Abyssinians were still raiding other Africans and carrying off slaves. It was 1922 before the British had gained sufficient control in Tanganyika to stamp out slavery there. Arabs were the leading slave raiders in East Africa, ranging over an area larger than all of Europe. The total number of slaves exported from East Africa during the 19th century has been estimated to be at least 2 million.
What?
The form in which the story of slavery has reached most people today has been along the lines of the best-selling book and widely watched television miniseries Roots by Alex Haley. Challenged on the historical...
And you know I've seen that before. At the time, I mean, it seemed pretty historically accurate, you know. Let's see. I mean, he's on here now, so obviously something going on. So, oh man, let's get ready for it, bro. Here we go. Here we go. Come on.
Accuracy of Roots. Haley said,
Hold up. Run that back. Now let's
selling book and widely watched television miniseries Roots by Alex Haley.
Okay.
Challenged on the historical accuracy of Roots, Haley said, I tried to give my people a myth to live by. This instrumental use of history, or purported history, is open to the same objections as other instrumental myth-making. Despite the impression created...
Hold on. I'm going to have to research that, all right? On my own time. I'm going to come back in the comment section to verify that. Because if that's true, That's crazy. You present this image in a movie just to, you know what I'm saying? That's crazy. 'Cause that's back in the day when that first came out. That was one of the most popular movies, man. And at the time, it was seen as historically accurate. So for him to say that now, I mean, you know what I'm saying? That's crazy. Come on.
By roots, during the era of the massive slave trade from West Africa, a white man was more likely to catch malaria in Africa than to catch slaves himself. The average life expectancy of a white man in the interior of
I don't know about
sub-Saharan
that one.
Africa at that time was less than 1 year. By and large, men from Europe or the Western Hemisphere came to the coasts of Africa, bought their slaves, and left as soon as possible. Even so, the death rates among the white crews of the ships carrying slaves to the Western Hemisphere were as high as the death rates among the slaves themselves. It
What?
was only much later, after quinine and other medical measures enabled Europeans to survive where there were tropical diseases, was it possible for them to invade Africa in force and establish empires there.
All right, man. I'm gonna have to research that too. That was a crazy. That was. Hold on. What?
Other medical measures enabled Europeans.
Before that.
Even so, the death rates among the white crews of the ships carrying slaves to the Western Hemisphere were as high as the death rates among the slaves themselves. It was only.
I need stats for that one. I need stats, man. I'm gonna do some research on that because, like, I like hearing new information, but if something does sound like out of character, it's always best to do your own research. All right, so I'm gonna check it out though. But that if that's true, that's also crazy. That's also a crazy fact, bro. If that's true, I mean, hey, comment down below. Let's get into it.
Much later, after quinine and other medical measures enabled Europeans to survive where there were tropical diseases, was it possible for them to invade Africa in force and establish empires there. But by then, the Atlantic slave trade had already been ended. During the era of that trade, Africa was largely ruled by Africans, who established the conditions under which slave sales took place. The crew of a slave ship was in no position to defy African rulers and their armies by going out across the land and capturing people willy-nilly. The stronger African peoples captured and enslaved the weaker peoples. The same pattern found over the centuries in Europe, Asia, the Western Hemisphere, and Polynesia. In Nyasaland, the Ngoni and Yao swaggered over and terrorized other tribes. In Uganda, the Baganda made life miserable for their neighbors. And the Nyoro and Hima of Anko enslaved Toro women and children. The Tutsi dominated the Hutu in Rwanda. The Maasai lorded it over the Kikuyu and Kamba. And the latter, in turn, held the Indorobo in a kind of serfdom. It was precisely the fact that Europeans, except for the Portuguese, seldom participated in the raids that captured and enslaved Africans that enabled most people in Europe and the Americas to remain oblivious to the traumatic experience that this was, with some Africans committing suicide to avoid capture and wives being whipped as they tried to cling to their husbands or children. Historian David Breon Davis pointed out that Europeans had little contact with the actual process of enslavement, and that, as late as 1721, the Royal African Company asked its agents to investigate the modes of enslavement in the interior. Europeans typically saw only the end results, enslaved people being offered for sale on the coast. It was much the same story in the Ottoman Empire, where those who bought slaves had no idea what these slaves had been through before. The unique position of the Western world in the history, and especially the destruction of slavery, need not imply that there was unanimity within the West on this institution. In addition to whites who defended the enslavement of Africans on racial grounds, or who opposed general emancipation on social grounds, there were many whites, and even blacks, who defended slavery as a matter of self-interest as slave owners. Although most black owners of slaves in the United States were only nominal owners of members of their own families, there were thousands of other blacks in the antebellum South who were commercial slave owners, just like their white counterparts. An estimated 1/3 of the free persons of color in New Orleans were slave owners, and thousands of these slave owners volunteered to fight for the Confederacy during the Civil War. black slave owners were even more common in the Caribbean. In short, there were...
Well, like, I'm not sure when they did volunteer to fight in the Civil War, if they, I guess, did a good job, or if we won, if they served their entire term, weren't they granted freedom? Wasn't that the whole trade off of the whole if you want to be free, if you're a slave, you want to be free, fight for your country kind of thing. So I did hear about that, and that's interesting. I ain't gonna hold y'all. That's crazy. And on top of that, how all of the black slave owners, how I knew there were a few of them, but we like, I definitely didn't know that there was so many of them, like in the thousands. Like that's a mind blowing stat right there. Man, this is crazy. I already knew this was gonna be crazy, but this is getting out of pocket, bro. Let's see what else I got, man. Come on.
Many defenders of slavery in the West, even in the 19th century. And outside the West, slavery was too widely accepted to require defense. No other nation ended slavery in the same way as the United States did, and few ended it after so short a struggle, as history is measured. How and why did slavery end in most of the world? There were two major processes. Over the centuries, as more and more territories around the world consolidated into nation-states with their own armies and navies, raiding those territories to capture and enslave the people who lived within them became more hazardous in itself, and also risked military retaliation against the countries from which the raiders came. Thus, more and more peoples became off-limits to slave raiders over time. Put differently, the areas which remained subject to slave raiding over the centuries were primarily those where the people lived in smaller or weaker societies. Such societies continued to exist where it was difficult, for geographic or other reasons, to consolidate large areas under one government. This was true of the Balkans, the backwaters of Asia, and much of sub-Saharan Africa. By the early modern era, sub-Saharan Africa, with its numerous and severe geographic handicaps, was one of the last remaining areas from which vast numbers of people could be enslaved.
All right, cool. So that was Thomas Sowell once again giving the facts about slavery. I already knew a few of those statistics and facts about slavery. But as far as the one point that kind of caught me off guard was the amount of black people that own slaves themselves. Like that's a crazy, like, mind state to be in, to torture, I guess, your own race. So that's a whole different ball game to talk about. But once again, man, Thomas Sowell came through, giving us history, bro. And this wasn't taught in schools, and it's kind of a few of the things that were brought up. I'm definitely gonna do my own little research on them, but that's the whole idea of this whole doing reactions and stuff and learning new information, to get out there and learn and to get out there and research your own stuff and learn your own stuff, man. But that was crazy, man. But always second guess, man. A lot of this stuff I was kind of like, is this really true, or he just talking? You know what I'm saying? But what I've gathered so far about Thomas Sowell, man, he don't waste his breath. He always does his research first, before he speaks about anything. And so far, he's come correct, bro. On every video we've done of him so far, he's on point. So, like I said, I'll do my own thing. You know what I'm saying? When the cameras are off, double check these things. But if all this is true, this is crazy, bro. And it definitely needs to be taught in schools, bro. Absolutely. Absolutely. So if you guys enjoyed the video, make sure you guys click like, subscribe to this content. Again, Thomas Sowell, facts about slavery. We're not gonna talk too much, you guys. Make sure you guys comment down below if you have any feedback on the stats you heard yourselves. And let's get out of here, people. Peace.
Come up from the bottom, 9 minutes to the top. Rolling through your city like light don't start. Speed line where your heart don't pop. Play with that magic part. It's my time, all about that rock. Come here, girl, with the open shot. Got a bunch of knots.